The elevator was broken, which Calla discovered at the exact moment she had 3 boxes stacked to her chin and a duffel bag cutting into her left shoulder and a set of keys she had not yet learned to work quickly. The sign on the elevator door was handwritten, which she found oddly comforting. Evidence that the building had at some point been managed by an actual human being who used actual pens. She stood in the lobby and looked at the sign, and then at the stairs, and then at the boxes, and made the calculation that anyone makes in that situation, which is not whether to do it but how many trips. She had 7 boxes. She was on the 7th floor. She had told nobody where she was moving, which meant she had nobody to call for help. Which was the point? The point was that nobody knew where she was going. The point was that she was going to carry 7 boxes up 7 flights of stairs entirely alone, and that this was not a problem, but a feature. She made it to the 5th floor before she had to stop. She set the boxes down on the landing and stood with her hands on her knees and looked at the wall and breathed. The stairwell smelled like old building, which is a smell that has multiple components, and the light on the 5th floor landing had a flicker in it that she was going to need to ignore if she was going to live here. She picked the boxes back up. She made it to the 6th floor without stopping, which she counted as a victory. The 7th floor was end of hall. Left. Apartment 715, which was the number she had memorized before she packed anything, because she had been the kind of person who memorized the important things first for as long as she could remember. And 3 years with Daniel had made her more careful about that, not less. She turned left at the top of the stairs and walked down the hall with the boxes and found her door and put the boxes down and reached for her keys. The keys were at the bottom of her bag. Of course they were. She had put them somewhere accessible when she left the old apartment, and somewhere during the intervening 4 hours of driving and carrying, and one ill-advised stop at a gas station where she had reorganized the front seat. They had migrated to the bottom of the bag beneath her phone charger and a granola bar wrapper, and the specific chaos that accumulates in a bag when you have been moving through a stressful day and no longer have the bandwidth to maintain any system. She was crouched on the hallway floor going through the bag section by section, with her back to the nearest other apartment door, the one with the brass number plate that read 715. When that door opened, she had not been expecting it to open. Nobody had told her the apartment directly beside hers was occupied, which was either an oversight by the property manager or the result of a tenant who did not appear on the standard tenant notification forms, which was a thing she would think about later, but not right now. She did not hear it open over the sound of her own rummaging. What she registered was the slight change in air pressure that a hallway experiences when a door opens nearby. And then a voice. "You're in 716. It was not a question. It was not a greeting. It was a factual statement, delivered in the tone of someone who has confirmed a thing and is now communicating the confirmation. And it was directed at her in the particular way that statements are directed at people when the speaker wants them to know they have been observed. She looked up. The man in the doorway of apartment 715 was holding a coffee mug. He had dark hair that had not been recently introduced to a comb, and was wearing a grey shirt that had the quality of something worn for comfort rather than presentation. He was looking at her with an expression that was not unfriendly but was not especially social either. The expression of a person for whom the baseline mode is assessment. 716. She confirmed, and went back to the bag because the keys were still in there and she was not going to find them by looking at him. She heard him lean against the doorframe, or felt it, the slight shift in the hallway's acoustic quality. "You moved in today," he observed. She found the keys under the phone charger. "Currently moving in," she replied, and stood up and turned to her door. The key went in on the first try, which was the best thing that had happened since the lobby. She pushed the door open and looked at the empty apartment and then back at him, because he was still there. He was looking at the stack of 3 boxes she had left in the hall. Specifically, he was looking at the label on the top box, which she had written herself in black marker Calla M. Kitchen. She had put her name on everything, which was a habit she had from childhood and had never broken. Calla, he said, reading it with the tone of someone filing something away. Not a greeting, not a question, a notation. She picked up 2 of the 3 boxes and went into the apartment. When she came back for the 3rd, he was still in his doorway with his coffee. Matteo, he offered. When she reached for the last box, which was the first actually social thing either of them had said in this conversation, she looked at him. He had the particular quality of stillness that she had learned to notice in people. Not the stillness of someone who is at ease, but the stillness of someone who has very thoroughly decided what they are doing, which is different. Calla, she replied, as if he had not just read her name off a box. He accepted this without comment. She picked up the 3rd box and went inside. She did not look back. She was fairly sure he stayed in his doorway until she closed her door, which was a thing she could feel rather than confirm. The sensation of being observed by someone who was making no particular attempt to hide that observation but was also not doing anything alarming with it. The apartment was empty, and the light in the late afternoon came through the 2 windows that faced west and fell across the wood floor in long rectangles, and the walls were the particular shade of white that, painted over many times, looks, which is not quite white but the memory of white, carrying a history of other people's colors underneath. She set the box down in the kitchen and stood in the middle of the main room and looked at the space that was going to be her life for the foreseeable future, and tried to feel something about it that was not just the absence of something else, the absence of Daniel's things, the absence of Daniel's specific brand of presence, which had a weight to it that she had not fully understood until she had been living without it for 6 weeks and noticed that she was breathing differently, that her shoulders were sitting somewhere lower than they had in years. The absence of the particular alertness she had lived in for 3 years, the low-level readiness for a tone shift or a question asked at the wrong time, or the sound of keys in the door when she had expected another hour of quiet. She went back down to the lobby and got 2 more boxes and carried them up the stairs and did not stop on the 5th floor landing this time, which she counted as evidence of something. She was not sure what. She made 4 more trips. On the 3rd of those trips, she passed a woman coming down the stairs who looked at her with the particular expression of long-term building residents encountering new tenants, which is a blend of assessment and territorial memory. The look of someone filing away information about who is now sharing their walls. On the last trip, the hallway was quiet, and apartment 715 had its door closed, and the light on the 7th floor landing did not flicker, which she chose to read as the building settling into a more cooperative mood toward her. She brought the last box inside and shut her own door and locked it. Both locks, the deadbolt first and then the chain, which was a habit she had developed during the last year with Daniel and had not been able to stop, even though the reason for it was no longer present. She stood in her new apartment, surrounded by everything she owned, which was less than she had owned 6 months ago and more than she needed, and tried on the quiet of the place to see how it fit. It fit. She was surprised by how completely it fit. The way a thing fits when you did not know you were looking for it, and then it arrives, and you understand that you have been looking for it for a long time. She sat down on the floor in the middle of the boxes and pulled her knees up and listened to the building around her. The sounds that buildings make when they are old and settled and occupied by people going about their particular lives. Footsteps and water pipes, and the distant sound of someone's television through a wall. The ordinary evidence of other people existing nearby in ways that had nothing to do with her. She thought about the man in 715, which was an odd thing to have in her mind, but was there anyway. The way things are there when they are slightly unusual and you have not yet decided what to do with them. She thought about the way he had said her name, not as a greeting but as a confirmation, reading it off the box with the tone of someone who already had the information and was merely verifying it. And then she set the thought aside because she had more immediate things to deal with, which was all 7 boxes and the beginning of the rest of her life. And that was enough to think about for one afternoon. 2 weeks into the apartment, Calla had established the following facts about her neighbor. He was up before 6 because she could hear his door open and close at an hour when the building was still making only its nighttime sounds. He had visitors who arrived at irregular intervals and did not stay long, which was a pattern she associated with either a very busy professional life or something else that she had decided not to think about specifically. He had, on 3 separate occasions, been in the hallway at the same time as her and had said good morning with the tone of someone for whom a greeting is an item on a list. Transactional and completed. He'd drunk a lot of coffee, which she knew because the smell of it reached the hallway in the morning and because she had once seen him with a second cup at 10 in the evening, which was either a very high caffeine tolerance or a schedule that did not follow normal human rhythms. She had not asked him anything. He had not asked her anything. It was a clean and uncomplicated arrangement, and she found it, against her expectations, genuinely comfortable. On a Tuesday morning she was in the hallway at the same time as him for the 4th time, which she had not planned but had also not avoided, when he looked at the bag over her shoulder and said, without any particular preamble, "The coffee place on 81st is better than the one on Broadway." She stopped. He was in the act of locking his own door and did not look at her when he said it, which meant he had noticed where she went in the mornings, which meant he was paying more attention to her schedule than she had realized, or he had very good peripheral awareness, which was also possible. "I'll keep that in mind," she told him. He nodded and went toward the elevator, which had been repaired by then, and she stood in the hallway for a moment longer than necessary before following. They did not ride the elevator together. He was already gone when she got there, which she told herself was fine and not at all a missed opportunity for something she could not have named. She tried the coffee place on 81st on Wednesday. It was, in fact, better. The espresso was darker and the cup was warmer when it arrived, and the person behind the counter did not make conversation, which was exactly what she wanted at 7:30 in the morning. She did not tell him this because she did not see him that morning, but she thought about it in a way that was slightly disproportionate to the significance of the information, and she noticed herself thinking about it, which was a thing she had learned to notice after 3 years with Daniel. When she was giving more mental space to a person than the situation warranted, it was usually worth paying attention to why. The why, in this case, was not yet clear to her. She told herself it was the general novelty of having a neighbor who seemed interested in her well-being in the particular way that people are interested in well-being when they have decided, for reasons of their own, to track it, as opposed to the other kind of interest, the kind that monitoring disguises as care. Then she went to work and did not think about it for the rest of the day, which was only partially true. The message from Daniel arrived on a Thursday at 2 in the afternoon, which was a time of day she did not usually look at her phone because she was usually in the middle of something. She saw it on the way out of a meeting. The small notification appearing at the top of her screen with the name she had not yet brought herself to delete from her contacts. "Hey, just thinking about you." 3 words that she had learned over the course of their relationship were never what they appeared to be, which was a casual impulse toward connection, and were instead a measurement tool, a way of checking whether she was still accessible, whether the distance between them had settled into something he needed to close. The language of the message was warm, and the language of the message was a lie, and she had known both of those things for long enough that recognizing them no longer required effort. She stared at the message for 30 seconds, and then put her phone in her pocket and kept walking. She had changed her number 3 weeks ago, and had given it to exactly 12 people, all of them women. None of them connected to Daniel in any way she was aware of. The fact that the message had arrived on the new number was information, and the information was not good. She thought about it on the walk home, and then on the elevator, and then in the hallway, turning it over in the particular way she had learned to process things she did not want to face directly, approaching them from the side rather than straight on. The door to 715 opened while she was standing in front of her own door with her key in her hand and not quite inserting it. Matteo came out with a jacket on and stopped when he saw her. She had the expression on her face that she knew she had, because she had felt it arrive. The one that meant she was thinking about something she did not want to be thinking about, and could not quite clear it in time. He looked at her without comment for a moment. "Problème," he said. Not a question. The same declarative mode he used for everything. The mode that told you he had already assessed the situation and was waiting for the data to catch up. "Minor one," she told him. He looked at her for another moment and then said, with the particular flatness of someone who does not editorialize, "The coffee on 81st is open until 10. She looked at him. "Is that an invitation?" she asked. He appeared to think about this with more genuine consideration than the question probably required. "It's information," he replied. She decided she was going to take it as an invitation and see what happened. They walked to the coffee place on 81st, which took 7 minutes and involved less conversation than she had expected and more comfortable silence than she was used to. He walked slightly ahead of her in the way that people walk when they are accustomed to being first through doors and had not adjusted for company, and she found this less irritating than she might have expected, possibly because it was clearly not performative, but simply his default mode. They got coffee and sat at a table by the window, and she told him about her job, which was in publishing, copy editing, and he listened with the same focused quiet he brought to everything. Not the nodding along quality of someone waiting for their turn to speak, but actual attention. He told her, when she asked, that he was in property management, which was a description that fit the building if you did not think too hard about it, and she had decided, somewhere between the lobby and the 7th floor, not to think too hard about it. The evening was not remarkable and was also the most relaxed she had felt in the company of another person since she could remember, which was a thing she noted and did not yet know what to do with. She did not tell him about Daniel. She had not told anyone about Daniel. Not in the full and accurate version. Not in a way that included the reasons she had changed her number and moved without leaving a forwarding address and carried the chain-locking habit into a new building where it was technically unnecessary. She was not ready to tell it yet. It was still in the processing phase, which was a phase she had learned did not have a predictable duration and could not be hurried by talking about the thing before she was ready to give it its true shape. There was a version of events she could have offered. We broke up. It was difficult. I needed a change. She had given that version to co-workers, to her landlord, to her mother on the phone. She had not given the version underneath it, the one with the specific details that made the general version feel like something she had read about rather than lived. And she was not going to give it to a man she had known for 2 weeks, however unexpectedly comfortable his company had turned out to be. When they walked back to the building, she felt the looseness in her shoulders that she had noticed the first evening in the apartment and had been trying to understand, the specific physical evidence of not being on guard. And she thought, this is what it is supposed to feel like. Just this. Nothing more complicated than this. In the elevator going up, after a silence that was easy rather than awkward, he looked at the floor, numbers changing, and said, without particular emphasis, "If someone is bothering you, it's worth saying so early." She looked at him. His expression was the same level quality it always was, not watching her reaction, just making a statement and letting it arrive however it was going to arrive. She thought about the message on her phone. She thought about the new number. She thought about how he had delivered that sentence. Not as a question, not as an opening for her to confide, but as information, the same way he gave her everything, as a fact she could use or not use as she chose. "I'll keep that in mind," she told him, which was the same thing she had said about the coffee and which she meant the same way sincerely, and with the understanding that she was not ready to do more with it yet. He nodded. The elevator opened on 7. They went to their respective doors and she heard his close first and then locked her own. Deadbolt, then chain, and stood in the quiet of the apartment and thought about what it meant that a person she had known for 2 weeks had noticed something she had not told anyone. Daniel appeared outside her office building on a Monday, which was 3 weeks after the message on the new number, and 12 days after she had blocked that number, and 4 days after he had sent a message from a different number, which she had also blocked. She was coming out at 6:15 with her bag over her shoulder and her coat not yet buttoned, and she almost walked into him before she registered that the man standing near the front steps in a grey jacket was not a stranger, but was someone she had spent 3 years of her life with. He was not blocking her path. He was standing slightly to the side, which was a technique she recognized because it was the technique of someone who wants to be seen before they are approached, who wants the other person to make the first move in the direction of the encounter. He had always been good at those small architectural decisions, the ones that shifted responsibility without appearing to. "Calla," he said, with the warmth of someone who has been waiting patiently for something they believe they are owed. She stopped walking. She did not close the distance between them. "I told you not to contact me," she replied, which was the only factual thing she could say that covered all of what she was feeling. He gave her the speech about how he was worried about her. She knew the speech because she had heard versions of it for 3 years. The particular arrangement of concern and hurt that was designed to make her feel responsible for both. She listened to it without expression and watched his face while he talked, which was something she had learned to do in the last months of their relationship. The watching rather than the listening, because what his face did was more informative than what his voice communicated. His face was doing what it always did during the speech, a controlled performance of sincerity. The brows arranged just so. The eyes doing the thing they did that had taken her 8 months to understand. Was not actual vulnerability, but a very accurate mimicry of it. She waited until he finished. Then she told him, "If you come near me again, I'll call the police." She delivered it without raising her voice, which was new. A year ago, she would have felt the need to qualify it, to soften it, to add something on the end that left him room. She walked past him and did not look back. She did not feel powerful. She felt tired in the way that doing a necessary thing you have been putting off always makes you feel. The exhaustion of having finally spoken the sentence and knowing you were going to have to mean it. She saw Daniel again on Wednesday, outside the coffee place on 81st. She had not told Matteo she went there every morning. She had not told anyone. She was standing at the counter waiting for her order when she saw him through the window, standing on the other side of the street with his phone out. Not looking at his phone, but looking at the coffee place with the patient. Assessing posture of someone who is waiting for a particular person to emerge from a particular location. She paid for her coffee and walked to the back of the shop and stood there for 10 minutes before leaving through the side door, which came out on a different street. She did not look to see if he had followed. She walked 3 blocks in the wrong direction before turning back toward the subway. She was going to be late to work. She was not going to think about how he had known she went there. She was thinking about it constantly. Actually, in the particular way that a problem that has no clear solution sits in the mind, occupying the background of everything else she did. Present, even when she was actively doing something else. The way a sound you cannot locate is more distracting than a sound you can place because you cannot decide whether to address it. She had told 12 people her new number. She had told nobody her new address. She had told 2 co-workers about the coffee place, but neither of them would have told Daniel. And she was fairly certain Daniel did not know either of them well enough to have asked. She went through the possibilities on the subway and on the walk from the station, and again while she was making dinner, and came up with nothing that adequately explained the information he seemed to have. And then she came up with one more possibility, which was that the information was coming from a direction she had not yet considered. And she set that thought aside, because examining it without more data was not going to make it more tractable and was going to make it considerably more alarming. She did not see Daniel for 4 days after that, which was not the same as not being aware of Daniel, because awareness and presence are different things, and she had learned, in 3 years, that Daniel's absence from her line of sight was not equivalent to Daniel not knowing where she was. She stayed later at work. She took different routes home. She changed the time she left the building in the morning. First earlier, and then later, varying it so it was not a predictable pattern. She did not go back to the coffee place on 81st, which was a loss she felt specifically and with an unreasonable degree of specificity given that she had only been going there for 2 weeks. And then she thought about what it meant that she was adjusting her life around his movements again, contracting the territory of her daily existence to make herself harder to find. And she felt something that was not quite anger but was its closest adjacent neighbor. The feeling you get when you realize you have been doing the thing you said you were going to stop doing, which is worse than being told to do it because you cannot blame anyone else for it. She told herself it was temporary. She had told herself that before, and before that, and before that. On Friday evening she was coming up the stairs, which she had started taking again because they were predictable in a way she appreciated, and she turned onto the 7th floor landing and found Matteo in the hallway. He was standing just outside his door talking to a man she had not seen before, a compact man in a dark jacket who was speaking quietly and who stopped when she appeared. Matteo looked at her with his usual level expression, but there was something in his assessment of her face that was slightly sharper than usual, the look of someone reading more than the surface. The other man had already looked away by the time she reached her door. She heard Matteo say something low and brief to him, who nodded and went toward the elevator without looking at her again. Matteo was still in his doorway when she got her key out. She turned. "The man from Monday," he stated, without specifying which Monday or what man, which told her something significant. She was very still. "You know about him," she told him. It was not a question. He held her gaze. "I know about him," he confirmed, "and then come inside." It was the first direct invitation he had ever extended, and she stood in the hallway with her key in her hand and thought about the fact that this was the moment she had been deferring, and that deferring it further was a choice that no longer felt reasonable. She went inside. His apartment was different from what she had constructed in her imagination, which had built it out of what she knew about him, which was the stillness and the coffee and the visitors and the property management answer that she had not examined too closely. It was spare without being bare. The kind of apartment that has been arranged by someone who knew exactly what they wanted in a space and had acquired only that. A long table with chairs, a couch that had clearly been chosen for comfort rather than appearance, books in a specific organizational system she could not immediately decode. She sat in one of the chairs and he sat across from her, and she told him about Daniel. She told him the full version, the one she had not given to anyone, because she had the feeling that the partial version would not serve the situation, and because she was tired of the partial version, and because something about the way he was sitting, completely still and completely present without a performance of concern, made it possible to say the true thing directly. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he told her something that required her to revise everything she thought she understood about why the past 4 weeks of her life had taken the shape they had taken. She sat with it for a while before she spoke. You knew Daniel was connected to your business before I moved in, she told him. Not before, he replied. 3 days after, when your lease went through my office and I recognized the address of your previous apartment as one that had been under observation in a different context. She looked at him. So when you told me that if someone is bothering me, it's worth saying so early, you already knew who it was. Himmet Hergaze. I knew who it might be, he replied. I didn't know how you were connected to him beyond the address. I didn't know if you knew what he was involved in. She held that. She let it settle before she responded. I didn't know, she told him. And the sentence was simple, and she meant it in its fullest sense. She had not known, had not chosen, had not been a participant in any of the things Daniel was involved in. She had only been a person who had loved someone badly and gotten out when she finally understood what badly meant. He nodded. The nod had the quality of a conclusion being recorded. Then he's not going to bother you again, he stated, and the way it landed was not a threat and was not a reassurance, but simply a fact in the future tense, delivered with the same certainty he used for everything he was certain of. She walked home the next morning thinking about the word before. Not before I moved in, he had told her. But 3 days after, he had recognized the address. 3 days after, he had known that the new tenant in 716 had a connection, however, indirect, to a situation his family was already tracking. She turned the sequence over in her mind, the way she turned sequences over when something in them did not sit right, not the facts themselves but the space between them. The things implied by the gap. He had recognized the address. He had known who she was leaving when he knew only where she had come from. He had let her move in. He had made coffee recommendations and walked to 81st Street with her and sat across a table from her and listened to her talk about her job. He had told her that if someone is bothering you, it's worth saying so early. He had done all of those things while knowing something she had not been told. And the question she was turning over was not whether she was angry about that, but whether anger was the right instrument for the situation, which was different and required more precision than anger usually permitted. She got to the lobby and stood in front of the elevator for a moment, and then took the stairs instead, which she had taken for the past 10 days, and which had become, in that time, less a security measure and more a habit. The particular kind of habit that forms when you do something often enough that it stops requiring a decision. She climbed to 7 and came out into the hallway, and his door was open. Not fully open, but ajar. The way it was when he was home and not expecting anyone in particular, which she had learned to read over the course of several weeks of living 12 feet away from him. She went to her own door and put her key in and then stopped. Because stopping was the honest thing, and going inside and locking the door would have been the avoidance thing. And she had spent 3 years doing the avoidance thing and had moved to a new apartment specifically to stop. She turned around. She knocked on the frame of the ajar door. He appeared in the doorway with a coffee mug, which was always where he appeared to be when she encountered him in a domestic context, and looked at her with the level expression that was his default, and that she had spent 6 weeks learning to read and still did not always get right. She had rehearsed what she wanted to say on the stairs, and it had arranged itself into something orderly. What came out instead was, when you recognized the address. What did you think I was? He was very still for a moment. He did not answer immediately, which was not evasion but the pause he made when he wanted to be accurate. I didn't know, he told her. A contact, someone he was using for proximity, someone who didn't know what she was living next to. She looked at him, and then he moved slightly. A small adjustment of weight that was the closest thing she had seen from him to discomfort. And then I met you, he replied. And the sentence was simple enough that she could not pass whether it was complete or whether it was the beginning of something longer that he had decided not to finish. She came inside. She had not planned to, and then she was inside, and the door was closed, and she was standing in his apartment for the second time, which felt different from the first time. Less emergency and more choice. He did not offer coffee, which she appreciated, because an offer of coffee would have normalized the conversation, and this was not a conversation she wanted normalized. She sat in the chair she had sat in before, and he sat across from her, and she told him the things she had been turning over since she left the hallway the night before. "I'm not angry that you knew," she told him. He waited. "I'm trying to understand the distance between what you knew and what you told me, and whether that distance was for my protection or for yours." The question landed in the room and stayed there. He looked at her for a long moment. "Both," he replied, and the honesty of it was not what she had expected, which would have been a version of the more comfortable answer. "I didn't know how much telling you would put you in, and I didn't know how much not telling you would cost." She looked at him. "That's a calculation you made without me," she told him. "Hemet hergaze." "Yes," he acknowledged. "It was." She sat with that for a moment. Then she asked, "What is Daniel involved in?" He told her. He told her in the particular voice he used for information he had decided she was entitled to, which was the same voice he used for everything factual, stripped of inflection, delivered as cleanly as a document. He told her about Daniel's connection to a rival family. He told her about what Daniel had been doing in the months before she left, which she had not known, and which explained several things she had attributed to other causes. The money that came and went in ways she could not track. The phone calls taken in other rooms. The periods of acute anxiety that she had absorbed into her own nervous system without understanding their source. She listened and she felt the pieces she had been carrying separately begin to connect to each other, and the connecting was both clarifying and nauseating in roughly equal measure. "He was going to use me to get to you," she told him. When he finished, "He was going to try." Matteo replied. He did not understand what that would mean for him. The sentence was not delivered as a threat. It landed the way all of the most certain things landed in this apartment, as a statement of fact about the future. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked the question she had actually come to ask, which was not about Daniel. "The night in the elevator, when you told me it was worth saying so early if someone was bothering me." He looked at her. "You already knew," she told him. "You'd already decided to handle it." He considered this. "I'd decided to handle Daniel," he replied, carefully. "I hadn't decided what to tell you. I was giving you an opening, in case you wanted to say something first." She found this, unexpectedly, the most honest thing he had said in either of their conversations, because it was the admission not of strategy, but of uncertainty, which was not a quality she had previously associated with Matteo Cavallo. "You could have just told me," she told him. "I know," he replied. "I didn't know you well enough to know how you'd receive it." She looked at him, and now he held her gaze. "Now I know you well enough to know I should have told you sooner," he replied, and the sentence was the closest thing to an apology that she had received from him, and she understood that it was, for him, the equivalent of a much longer one. She left after another half-hour, which was the amount of time it took for the conversation to reach a natural stopping point, which was not a resolution but the kind of plateau that requires time before the next stage. She stood in the hallway between their two doors and looked at the door to 7:15 and thought about the word before, which she had been thinking about all morning. 3 days after, he had known who she was coming from 3 days after she arrived, and he had still let her stay. And he had said good morning in the hallway and recommended the coffee place and walked with her in the evening. And none of those things were nothing. They were the small, accumulated evidence of a person who had decided, at some point, she could not pinpoint, that she was worth the complication. She unlocked her own door and went inside and did not lock the chain, which was the first time she had not locked the chain since she moved in. And she stood in the middle of her apartment, which no longer felt like a hiding place but like a place she was choosing to be. and thought about what that meant. Daniel did not appear again. She noticed his absence the way you notice the absence of a sound that has been present for a long time, with a quality of attention that was not quite relief and was not quite suspicion, but was the careful, provisional feeling of someone who has learned not to trust good news too quickly. She did not ask Matteo about it directly. She thought about asking, and then thought about the conversation they had already had, and decided that the version of herself who asked was the version who still needed something confirmed from the outside, and she was trying to be the version who trusted what the evidence in front of her was showing her. The evidence in front of her was this 7 days of Daniel not appearing, a morning when she walked to the coffee place on 81st without taking a different route, an evening when she walked home from the subway without checking behind her. Small things. Not dramatic. Exactly the right scale for the thing she was trying to learn, which was how to inhabit her own life without the constant readiness for it to be disrupted. She knocked on his door on a Thursday evening for no reason she could have articulated, except that she had been thinking about the conversation they had not finished, the one that had ended at the plateau. He opened the door with the expression of someone who had not been expecting a knock and was also not surprised by one, which was a contradiction she had stopped trying to resolve and had started accepting as simply being part of the particular texture of Matteo Cavallo. "I wanted to say something," she told him. From the hallway, he waited. She had planned this one. "Thank you," she said, "for the before part and the after part and the part in between where you were in the elevator with me and the part where you told me the truth when I asked for it." He looked at her for a moment. "That's a lot of parts," he replied, which was the closest thing to a joke she had ever heard from him, and landed with the delayed quality that the best understated things have. She was smiling before she realized she was going to. He looked at the smile with the expression of someone who has just received information that required updating several calculations simultaneously. "Come in," he told her. It was not a question, it was an invitation. Simple and direct. And she crossed the threshold of his apartment for the 3rd time and thought, this is the one that counts. She stayed for 2 hours that evening, which was longer than either of their previous conversations, and felt different from them in quality as well as duration. They talked about things that were not Daniel and were not the building and were not any of the information they had been trading, which turned out to be the most revealing kind of conversation, because what people choose to talk about when they have already said the difficult things is its own kind of data. He asked about the editing work and what she actually did in it, which was a more specific question than she was usually asked, and produced a more specific answer than she usually gave. She asked him about the books, and he told her the organizational system, which was not alphabetical and was not by genre, but by the order in which he had read them, which meant the shelves were an autobiography of sorts, if you knew how to read them. She said she would like to see it properly one day, which was the kind of sentence that means more than one thing at once, and he looked at her with the look that meant he had heard both meanings. She left at 10 and walked the 12 feet to her own door and went inside and sat down and thought about what it was like to want something without the accompanying anxiety about whether wanting it was safe. It was, she found, a very different feeling from any version of wanting she had experienced in recent years. With Daniel, wanting something had always come packaged with a secondary calculation about whether he would approve of the wanting, whether the thing she wanted would create a complication, whether expressing the want would cost her something she could not afford to lose and could not afford to keep either. She had gotten so good at the secondary calculation that she had sometimes finished it before she fully understood what she wanted in the first place, arriving at the safety assessment before the desire had finished forming, which meant she had been making decisions about things she had not yet fully allowed herself to want. She sat in her apartment with its not yet fully unpacked boxes and its western windows and thought about the fact that she had just spent 2 hours talking to someone without performing a single version of herself she did not actually recognize, and that the not performing had happened without her deciding to do it. She had not chosen it as a strategy. It had simply been what the situation permitted. She sat with that for a while. She was not sure she had ever lived in a situation that permitted it, which was information about the situation, and also, she was beginning to understand. Information about her. She did not see Matteo for 2 days after that, which was fine, which was normal, which was the rhythm of two people who lived next to each other and had their own lives and had not decided anything formally about what the evenings that were not this one meant. She went to work and came home and made dinner and read and did not check her phone for messages from blocked numbers, which had been a habit she had not noticed herself still practicing until she stopped practicing it. On the second morning, she woke up without having thought about Daniel before she thought about anything else. And she noticed it. She noticed it the way you notice the sudden absence of a low-level noise you had stopped registering because it had been constant for so long. The way silence only becomes legible after the sound is gone. She noticed it with the specific, quiet quality of attention that you give to something that might be fragile if you look at it too directly. She made coffee and stood at the western window and looked at the city below, which was doing what it always did, entirely and without regard for anyone watching it, and thought, this is what I came here for. Not the address, not the particular floor, not the broken elevator that turned out to be fixed. This quality of morning, this particular version of ordinary, she ran into him in the lobby on a Friday, which neither of them had planned, which was the best kind of coincidence. The kind that doesn't need any interpretation. He was coming in from outside with a coffee he had not offered her, which she registered and did not register. She was on her way out. They stopped at the natural point in the lobby where their paths crossed and looked at each other, and she thought about the conversation 2 nights ago and the books in order of reading and the way he had looked when she said she would like to see them properly one day. There's a good restaurant on Columbus, he told her, which was a sentence that had the structure of a suggestion without technically being one, which she had come to understand was his native mode of offering things, leaving her the room to either receive it or not, without the offer being retracted either way. She considered this for a moment. What kind? She asked. He named it. She had heard of it. Tonight, she asked. He looked at her with something in his face that was not quite the level expression but had not fully departed from it either. 7, he replied. She nodded. She went out and he went up and she walked to the subway thinking about the word tonight with a quality of attention that was disproportionate to the word and entirely proportionate to what it represented. She wore the green dress that she had packed in the 3rd box, the one she had labeled Calla M. Clothes in the black marker she had used for everything, and she stood in front of the mirror in the bedroom of her apartment and looked at herself with the clear-eyed quality of someone taking an honest inventory. She looked like herself, not the version of herself from 3 years ago that had learned to dress for someone else's approval, and not the version from 6 weeks ago that had dressed in whatever was cleanest, because she did not yet trust that. How she looked was a thing she was allowed to care about. She looked like the version that was currently being assembled in this apartment, in this building, in this sequence of mornings with western light and evenings without the chain on the lock. She picked up her bag and went to his door and knocked at 6:58, which was 2 minutes early. And when he opened the door, he was already in his jacket, and he looked at her for a moment before he said anything, which was its own kind of sentence. The restaurant was not dramatic. It was the kind of place that is confident enough in its food not to require drama from its surroundings, which was a quality she had started to value in places as well as people. They sat at a corner table and talked and ate, and she did not perform anything, which continued to be the thing she noticed most about being in his company. The specific absence of the effort she had spent years maintaining without even registering as effort. She told him about her life before the publishing job, which she had not told anyone because nobody had asked with the kind of attention that makes telling worth it. He told her, without being asked, that the building had come to him from his father, and that he had considered selling it more than once, and had not, which was information that revealed something about him she filed away with the rest of what she was learning. The dinner lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes, and ended not because either of them was finished, but because the restaurant was beginning the particular transition of a late Friday evening, and they were in the way of it. They walked home, which was 8 blocks, and involved the kind of conversation that happens when two people have already said the important things and are now finding out what the conversation looks like without the pressure of importance, which is often the best version. She walked beside him rather than slightly behind, which was different from the first time they had walked anywhere together, and he adjusted his pace without comment, which told her something. In the lobby, she pressed the elevator button and he stood beside her, and they rode up to 7 without either of them speaking, which was the particular silence of a situation that has reached a point where the next thing is clearly indicated and neither person is in a hurry. On the 7th floor, they walked to the point where the hallway split toward their respective doors, and she turned to face him. She was not performing anything. She was not calculating anything. She was simply standing in a hallway she had walked down many times now, 12 feet from where she had started, and looking at a person she had not been looking for and had found anyway. And that was the situation. "The books," she told him. He looked at her. "You said you'd like to see them properly," he replied. And the way he held the sentence was the way he held everything. Steady and without urgency, giving it room to be what it was going to be. "I would," she told him. He looked at her for a moment with the expression that she had been learning for 6 weeks and had not finished learning. Would not finish learning for a long time, which was fine. "Then come in," he told her. And it was the same invitation it had been the first time, and the second time, and the time at the threshold. She had called the one that counted, and she understood now that she had been wrong about which one that was. This was the one. She crossed 12 feet of hallway and went through his door into his apartment where the books stood in the order he had read them, and the quiet was the building's honest quiet, and the evening was whatever the evening was going to be, which was not something she needed to know in advance. And the door closed behind her, and she did not need to check whether it was locked.